I'm Helen. So you see my title here. It's a complicated title. Let me just start with the first part. So why participation? Why do I focus on participation here? For me, the concept of participation as an analytic concept is a way to evade another relation. And this relation is one that's deeply embedded in conventional modern analysis or conventional analysis in modernity. And this relation I want to evade is the relation between society and citizen, the state and the individual, the child and the family, and I've mixed up the sides there. So it's that relation that is so central to sociology that I wish to evade, and I'm like others. I think participation possibly is an analytic concept that we can use to evade that. Now, why do we want to evade this this normal way of going about social analysis? It's a one-many relation that we're trying to get away from here. And I think it's tripping analysts up these days because there are far too many unnoticed metaphysical assumptions built into this one-many relation. So rather than have to do the work of, say, we need to get away from this dichotomy and this dichotomy and this dichotomy, I prefer to just exit and opt for participation as a way of, it's a form of evasion. So I'll explain more about the second part of my title as I go along, but I want to use this notion or reconceptualize notion of participation because it needs some work done. It doesn't just immediately fit into what we want to do. We need to reconceptualize it. And I'll do some of that work today. Having done some of that work, I want to then take it a little further and imagine and see what are some of the things we need to think about if we're going to use participation to evade this one-many relation that's so embedded in so much social research. So, but first of all, thank you. Thank you to the organisers of the Techno-Ecology of Participation Symposium in Germany. Thank you for inviting me. I am delighted to attend in the form of a figure on the screen. And also thank you to the Northern Institute for supporting my wish to attend in this way and organising this event here. But most of all, thank you to my two audiences, two rather different audiences, and please accept that in being part of this audience here and that audience there, you're already participating and participating in a relational manner. And that's really an important thing for me to point out. So thank you. So just a little introductory blurb really on participation. Sybil, for example, a well-known sociologist, he sees the group as the unit of sociological analysis. Okay. And for him, groups are a secondary phenomenon. They are composed of intentional humans who have assembled for some reason. And the example he often uses in his writing is the intention to form a spiritual community out of which religion grows. So this notion of the intentional human individual who congregates with others of a similar ilk to form a group, it's that group that Simon takes as the core unit of sociological analysis. And so he imagines participation as willed involvement, right? A human stepping into a group and deciding to become part of the group. Now, my conceptualization of participation is very different. I see participation as a happening of a collective in a particular present. So it's a happening, it's an event. So participation is very differently conceptualized here than the way Simmel, for example, imagines participation. Now, where did I get this idea? I originally was inspired to develop this idea through participating in just such a happening nearly 30 years ago. And what I'm going to do is play a video that was made as part of the articulation of a radical maths curriculum that tried to take a logic of Yolngu Aboriginal life and the logic of the primary school maths curriculum and allow them to flow together, to form vortices where the streams interrupted and disrupted each other. This was there was a particular metaphor behind this vision of two streams, or two really sets of streams flowing together. I'm just taking a tiny bit, it's only 4 minutes long. There were a set of 4 videos made of this curriculum. I'm just taking 4 minutes and I've brutally edited it to just get the 4 minutes that we need. And what you will see is a group of children and others being instructed by a group of senior knowledge authorities, senior normal knowledge authorities, about this concept of participation. Let me just play this now, and then I'll come back. I'll actually come back to this slide and make a little commentary.
The Ghana Maths Workshop was held in 1990. Students from Yirrkala and Bachelor College teacher trainees came to Darwin for some days to work with the community. In the course of the workshop, traditional foods were prepared and eaten. The purpose was learning more about how the food activities are set in Jalpuri and Gurupuri, the parallel sacred systems of land and kin. On the left-hand side of the painting are the groups of ancestors collecting the cycad nuts. On the upper right, people are carrying bark on their heads to wrap the dough for the cycad bread. Below that is a roll of bundles already wrapped, perhaps already cooked. At the bottom of the centre panel, people are sitting down together to share the bread, according to law. Western eyes pick out these story pictures, but the formal patterns around them are at least as important. They give the message that this story of particular ancestors has a general significance. The social purpose of the cycad bread-making ceremony is given. It is set in kin relations, land rights and responsibilities, and sacred understandings. There are layers of meaning. Guruku meaning is about each person's exact place in the kin network. It fits to Jauti meaning. The fit comes from the way each kin position corresponds to exact land attachment. This in turn fits to specific sacred knowledge and responsibilities. All this is conveyed in the formal patterns of the picture. There is a well-developed system of traditional symbols to draw on. Such symbols are used to record and reproduce Yolngu ideas, like a different kind of writing.
So that's just a grabbed section of a much longer video. The footage at the beginning was footage filmed by a teacher. This is a school-based performance, collective performance of what I would call the Ngatu ritual. And this, for me, was my first understanding of participation as a happening in time and place, a happening that's generative of relations. I was a participant. I was, in a way, generated as a participant and as a beginning Yolngu knower, or a beginning knower of some outside understandings that are implicit in Yolngu life through my participation in this and other workshops. And as we see, so it's a story. We saw the women telling the story through the bark painting, the dulam, in beginning. Then since this actually was part of the material for a maths curriculum, we explained some of what she was saying, so there's a translation. The rest of the video, which is most of it, is the children and the adults actually doing the work of sorting the nuts and so on. And it's a very long, almost a week-long gathering in which a great deal of political and epistemic work is done. And what happens is that an agreement is reached and everybody is changed by that agreement, which is set in relations. So it's making, if you like, it's making of a happening, a truth, in a way, a truth of this place here and now. Which doesn't mean that people don't still disagree and that there's a great many differences at play, but it has happened. There is an agreement, there is a truth, and it's called a gulta if there is an agreement like this. So this is a happening participation that is generative of relations. So it was the inspiration from this participation for me that helped me, that I turned to when I felt a need to reconceptualize participation to evade this one-many relation of willed intentional human involvement that seems to be inside participation. So it's another way of coming at this. I'm radically multiplying the concept of participation, you might say. The gathering at the place is prior. So that's, if you like, the first happening, the gathering. The nuts are brought. So the nuts are the differences that are arriving. And it's not like they're going to go away, but what happens is the nuts is they're cracked and the seed is soaked, so cyanide comes out, and you can imagine the symbolic or metaphorical meanings that that's turned into. And then it's ground on stones, turned into bread, and we saw the bread pictured. And so that ceremony or that ritual was explained to me very early on as a turning inside out. It's bringing what's inside, all these differences that arrive, and making them into a one. So it's an eversion. There's a lot to be said about it, and of course, I would love to give a talk on that, but this talk is not on that. But I want you to notice that there's no whiff of intentional modern persons who have assembled for their intentional, rational or not, reasons. So the collective happens, entities emerge as related. That's my definition of participation. So certain things follow. Each and every participation, each and every happening is particular and unique. Every Ngaktu ritual is different from, but also the same as, every other Ngaktu ritual. A happening collective generates relations. Okay, it it generates differences and connections, and that's what relations are. Differences and connections, they all must go together. Happened or happening is ephemeral. It's not going to last forever. The gulper has a life, and then its power fades, and another ritual might be organised for another truth, another agreement to emerge, situated from that new time and place. So this is also, if we talk about participation in this way, we also can develop a notion of truth as situated. And I think that's very necessary these days, when we're really feeling the absence of, if you like, a theory of truth as situated. So, history stays in place, it sediments, it's here and now, it's in this place. And if we want to reenact the truth that was enacted first in this nocturne ritual, we remember, oh, this was first enacted in that place at that time with these people for these reasons, and so on. So it's radically situated in place and time. History stays there, doesn't go along a nice linear perspective. So the organisation, which just happens, the nuts arrive, that's the unit. That's the unit of being. It's not an assemblage of individuals. Individuals are what might or might not be generated as relations. So the vectors of participation flow in the opposite direction to the vectors of, say, Symmel's notion of the group. And so if you conceptualize participation in this way, you need to acknowledge that you're working with an analytic that has particular commitments entailed in it. And you need to know what they are and be able to tell people what they are. The commitments that went along with the making of this situated truth. So, some features of participation, if you like. I think the notion of an ecology of participation. We can think of it as an ecology of organisations too. When we think of participation in this way, there are quite significant political and epistemic consequences. And I would love to give a lecture on that too, but I'm not giving that lecture either. So when you think of the world as a mesh, a matrix, no, matrix is the wrong word, mesh, if you like, and it's irregular. It's like a gossamer that you might pull out like this, and you get, so it's not a regular mesh at all. If you think of the world as a mesh of past and present happenings, politics, which begins in difference, begins in disagreement, in this notion of participation, happens in collective, and it becomes the generation of ongoing generative dissensus. That's what you want, generative dissensus. You just need a little bit of consensus to say, yes, okay, we know what to do, we've got this, we can go on together recognising these differences. So it's a concept that theorizes, if you like, going on together, doing difference. You just need enough consensus. You need to, what's really important, much more important, is doing the dissensus generatively, and to know what better and worse is in terms of dissensus. Now, epistemic, there's lots of epistemic consequences too of thinking of the world in this way. So when participation is construed as happened collectives, knowledge generation becomes the co-constitution of knowers and knowns. And there has, in the sort of so-called ontological move, been a lot of talk about the constitution of knowers, the ontological constitution of knowns, of objects, Haraway, many others, talk about the ontological constitution of objects. Almost no one talks about the ontological constitution of knowers, and that is just as important. It's been totally left out of the conversation so far. Knowers and knowns come into being together, and this is really important because you can have radically different, you find a basis to those radically different ontologically constituted knowers. And that, I think, is a question that's really only beginning to be asked now. Okay, so just a little glimpse at what an ecology of participation might be, and now a little glimpse of what a techno-ecology might be. And this, of course, is the title of the symposium in Germany. And this is what the symposium is asking about, as I understand it. So, my first comment about the notion of a techno-ecology of participation is that the techno is actually redundant, because a happening of a collective in a particular present cannot not be technically mediated. It's particular, it's technical, it has to be mediated. In the nut book ritual, it's the nuts that are the technical mediators. For this reason, techno is redundant, but nevertheless I like it because we forget about that mediation all the time. And so I'm very happy to keep it there, just to remind people that participation actually cannot be done without some sort of technical mediation, some sort of particular technical mediation. Now, the techno that I'm interested in is language. If we're going to radically reconceive participation in this way, we also need to do something about our conceptualization of language. Our conceptualization of language, which is crucial in bringing the happening to fruition, for a truth to happen, but it's a technical mediation, is my, and it's the first technical mediation of participation. Language is not usually thought of in that way. In fact, it's a radically deflating account of language to see it in this way. Which doesn't mean that I think it's unimportant in any way. I love it, and I live in it and through it, as do all other humans and animals that speak. So, this is where we get into more detail. So, language as meaningful strings of words are usually thought of as the externalization of the working of human minds through meaningful vocalization. Okay, that's the usual story of language. It's an externalization of a working mind, human mind, that enables communication. That's the usual story. Now, I'm using story here. It makes it sound, it's a deflating move, yes, but it doesn't, by using story, I'm not, I could use theory, except theory is a bit less approachable. So I use story instead. They actually have a very close meaning etymologically. Okay, so my claim about language is that it's the externalization of the workings of patterned human bodies in place. And that language as the externalization of a patterned human body entails a particular expression of being, or human being, as a relation. So language both enacts the relation that is the human form of being, and constitutes a very particular and specific relation. So, for me, okay, I'm claiming language is an externalization of the workings of patterned human bodies in place, and additionally, I want to claim that each language entails particular expression of being as relational, of the human being as a relation. So I'm proposing a way of thinking about differences between language here. Okay, so a couple of the things that we need to ask this. How is this claim, how does this claim matter for our understanding of collective life and of the individual's life? So what? Okay, yeah, all right. Most people say language is an externalization of the human mind. You say it's the externalization of the working human body. So what? Why does it matter? And I think that it matters because if we follow it carefully, we can come to a very generative account of differences between the way languages work, understanding of the difference in the ways that different languages work. And of course, my working life, really, since I became very interested in numbers, has been, first of all, was carried out between numbers that had a life in Yoruba language, a West African language, and then later on, the way in which relations have a life between English and Yoruba. So it's no surprise that I might come come out with an idea like this because my entire working life has been held in these tensions between languages that are very, very different. Okay, so this is a claim that I have here. The particular expressions of being as relation that different languages evoke become as commitments. They just flow to become commitments about how the world is, generating particular forms of life. Okay, so that's a proposition there, by which I'm beginning, I hope, to convince you that it does matter that languages emerge from bodies rather than minds. People who are interested in ontology will see that I'm getting into ontological matters here and talking about being as relation. So, just how novel is this new story of language, new theory of language that I'm proposing here? Well, conventional accounts of language generally fall into two boxes. You have the functionalists and the structuralists. Many linguists, if an outsider just looks at the output of a linguist, you can tell if they're functionalists or structuralists, even if they've never thought of it for themselves. It's there, embedded in their assumptions that they're making in doing their linguistic work. So, functionalism says that language happens in minds as a result of the functions, that social functions. So functionalism is a social, so it's social in origin. Structuralism is biological or semiotic in origin. They're two radically different bits of structuralism. But both have language as the externalized expression of mindful intention. And for them, as for me, words as mindful intentions, sorry, not for me, for them, words are mindful intentions translated into meaningful sound waves. Okay, that's what a word is. It's a sound wave. Physically, it's a sound wave. And for almost every linguist, there might be one or two in here who differ. Words are these mindful intentions that are translated through the body, from the mind through the body into a sound wave. It's an unusual way to think of language, but take out the mind, and yes, I'm quite happy to go along with words as translations, as sound wave translations. It's just that it emerges, first of all, in the body. I'm not saying there is no place for minds, but the minds come in later, when the language structures are already established. Then, the other way in which I agree with almost every other linguist in the world is that the beginning of language acquisition begins with children heralding or announcing. If a dog walked in and there was an 18-month-old baby, the baby might be a little alarmed, and she should be, and say, "Woof!" Because, it's unusual to see a dog walk into lecture theatre. And the baby announces the dog, or announces the object of the dog as a wolf. Later on, she will learn dog. Okay, I can go along with that as the beginning of language acquisition. So there's a lot held in common. But where the novelty of my story about language comes in is that it accounts differences between languages. And the difference lies in a different story of language acquisition. And so the difference comes in how I tell how acquisition proceeds after this heralding. Okay, so imagine a baby sitting in a high chair at breakfast time, and the young father is trying to get the baby fed so he can get her off to childcare, and he's handing her toast, and she's very pleased. She can announce toast. And then she drops it and says, down. It's still an announcing, but she's not announcing an object anymore. She's announcing a change. She's announcing a change in position. Yes, where am I? Okay, so language acquisition proceeds from announcing objects to announcing change, and I'm talking to the wrong slide. Okay, let me go back to the beginning. This is the conventional account of how heralding proceeds. Sorry for that muddle. What conventionally is noticed is that having announced the toast, a child might shift to my toast, or this toast, or Vegemite toast, or and what is happening then, or what's noticed in the conventional account, is the child is beginning to take on designation. Maybe a toast finger as a spatiotemporal entity, as a spatiotemporal object, a thing, an object that she holds. And this is what the conventional linguists notice, and it's imagined as children are beginning to move into mindful naming. Now, Piaget made a very successful career out of mapping that story of children moving into mindful naming. That's what Piaget did. And that's what he noticed. I noticed something different, and I've already given you the clue. What I notice is that the child will say toast, and then she'll say down. Maybe it's because I was always the one trying to get the child off to childcare, but I wasn't thinking of how wonderful it is that this child. That's what I noticed. I noticed that there's different heraldings here, there's different announcings. So heralding is gradually expanded. So you herald objects, and then you herald change or announce change. And then, following the patterning of sounds that's enacted by a human, I would say in exasperation, yes, your toast has fallen down again. And the child, the pattern child's body connects toast and down. Toast down. She's learned a new game. She can, and what has happened there is that she predicates. She predicates a downness of the toast. And as soon as she predicates, she also designates. And this, so in my story about language, noticing different things in acquisition, designation grows out of the coding that's implicit in predication. Predication is accidental connecting of two heraldings or two announcings, and depending on the pattern that the child hears and reproduces, she designates this or she designates that. So here we're getting into difference, and I'm sorry this is going on a bit long. Difference between languages begins in predication form, i.e. how change is coded in sound. Coding change effects, brings out, produces what it is that is changed. The form of the designant, in other words, the entity that is designated, precipitates in the form of predication. And this is what I call the ontic effect of language as a technique, as a technical mediation. And if as soon as I start talking about this, and I have to speak in some language, and now I'm speaking English, any particular telling of this, as I've been telling here, has to be in a language, and then we start getting into ontological effects. We tell a story about it. We tell a story about words. Okay. English designates spatiotemporal. Where are we? Oops. I'm getting into a muddle with my slides. I do apologise. Okay, so English, when you designate in English, if you tell it in English, you designate spatiotemporal particulars. If you speak in Yoruba, you designate sortal particular, dogmata. This is a long story. If you designate in the Yolngu language, you're designating a vector particular. So this, when you designate, it's about particulars. In this story, there are no universals. Okay, so just wrapping up. If we're going to participate in reconceptualizing participation, I think we do need to propose a techno-ecology of participation. We do need to recognise language as a first techno. We need to recognise language form as mind-free. In other words, designation does not come from minds, it comes from bodies. Predication through predication. So we recognise language as a mind-free technique with effective forms having ontic and ontological effects as we enact relations and as we talk about enacting relations. So participating in a reconceptualisation of participation. Why does the new story of language matter? Well, reconceptualised participation renders relations of forms of being, and relations only arrive as particulars. There are no universals. It allows for differentiation between ontic and ontological, which I think is a really crucial analytic decision to make. But most of all, it allows for recognition of radically alternatively constituted forms of knowers. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments? Thank you very much, Helen. More food for thought. We have time for a few questions then.
Thank you. We might take some time to digest what you said about language. Could you start by talking about participation and show us that video? I assume your experience of observing participation in land.
Participating in participation
caused you to consider this, and possibly because those forms of participation differed from what you may have expected based on your culture here. However, your definition of participation appears to be universal, and your focus on difference is only in the language aspect. So do you account for differences of participation?
Every participation is different. I mean, participation is only as such, it's a vague whole, if I might say so.
You're characterising language difference, but you don't seem to talk about
participation
systematic differences with participation.
Because there aren't any systematic differences. Every participation is different. Radical difference.
So you kind of refuse to generalise across kinds of participation and say, well, this is a certain kind, this is another kind.
Well, if it's useful, you can do that. But there's no reason if there's not a reason. So why should I want to do that in telling the story? Because I'm not. What I'm doing here is not doing inductive generalisation. I'm doing abductive generalisation. I'm saying participation is a vague whole. It might look like this, or this, or this, or this, or this, or anything.
Yet this came to you because of that experience in
No. It was an embodied experience. It wasn't like I was going there observing. I was a teacher. Well, I had a teacher attached to me. In fact, I was a student. I was a baby, and I had the kids. So I actually wasn't. I'm not doing this as an ethnographer. I'm not doing it as a linguist. I'm a teacher. I'm there completely accidentally as a teacher-educator. And as soon as I get to Yolngu, they say, okay, you've got a lot to learn. And they put me in the babies class. Literally, I was sitting there on the floor with the babies, learning the names of Gurutu. Literally. And it worked. So, over a number of years, I gradually grew up. And I thought, ooh, there's a story here.
You talked about bodily expression. Is there some counterpart in a bodily reception?
Oh, I think that they go together. I think you can't have bodily expression without expression being a two-way vector. And this notion that bodies, have these senses, I think that is, it's a silly story, really. bodies experience, and what they experience, bodies experience experience. They don't experience things, they don't experience emotions, bodies experience experience. So, you know, taking that silly truism, and that goes back to Dewey, 1905, seriously, you know, expression and reception are one and the same. They're the experience of experience.
And there's the experience of action,
Which
is a way of receiving as well as a way of expressing.
Yes, yes. It's the experience of the experience in action.
Should we elaborate the differences of the particulars between English and other languages?
The particulars of the designates?
Yes.
That
Could you give us some examples of the English? Yes. Yeah.
I think we've lost the bottom because it's in the one.
If you click on that little thing there, and that'll open it up for you if you can manage to aim for that.
Lost my window.
There it goes, there it is.
Yes.
Really bright.
Okay, so this is the way it comes out in your matter. Sorry. Excuse me. This is the way it comes out in English. When I designate, if I say the cat sat on the mat, what is designated there is the cat. Predication is the sat. The mat is the predicate, part of the predicate. Okay. So the cat is ontologically a bounded entity, located matter set in space-time, a lump of matter in empty space-time. Okay, that's what spatiality proves particular. If I say that same sentence in Yoruba, there's no, in English there's a set word order because of the form of predication and designation. Yoruba, there's no set word order. So, because the designant is indicated by a suffix. And in Yoruba, if I translate that into, if I say what a Yoruba sentence says in English, it could be sat, cat matter, mat matter. Okay, so it's a sort of particular, it's a sort of matter. And it's imagined as spread through space and time. So there are no adjectives in Yoruba, there's only modes. Because what you have to do in Yoruba, if you want to specify in any way, is specify a mode of here and now, manifesting here and now. You do that in the verbs.
Which means in Yoruba there is no tense.
Yes.
Or
Yes. Yeah. In Yolngu matter, I will refer to myself. Yeah.
So yeah.
Catness at madness.
So yeah, vector particulars means that it conceptualizes only the directions and strengths. Mathematical effects.
And it emerges from looking really carefully at the way verbs work and the way nouns work, and what other elements are in the language. I mean, in a way, I was so astonished to find that Yoruba is a language with no adjectives. Part of the reason is you can't have numbers without adjectives.
And what's the implications of these differences in participating audience?
Ontologically, they're very different worlds of participation.
So is there something Whorfian in there?
No, and this is, you're quite right. We seem to have already been there. But the problem with Worf is that he went with this mindful story of language, and there was no way to come up with a generative account of difference. And it's the Worfian account, the Worfian safe, Sophia, that's behind the Catalonian problem.
Right.
Which, I mean, you know, it's, so yeah, it looks like we've been here before. We've sort of been here before. We've tried to recognise differences in language, but it was we didn't get it right because we had language as this mindful production by rational human beings.
Okay, I've got one more quick one. Sorry, did you have one?
Oh, mine just sort of related to what Ian was saying. I didn't get my hand up quick enough to follow straight on. And it was just in the video, it was very interesting when I assumed there was a woman speaking, telling the story. Maybe she was a teacher at the time, and at the end she stopped and said, okay, we've heard that, now we know it, let's go. And that was a really interesting moment. Like, it wasn't like, okay, we've heard that, now we need to keep learning. We've heard it so we know it. So it felt like maybe that was a particular pedagogical mode happening there. Is that right?
I think so, and partly because, you know, this is not real participation, guys. Okay, now we have to really participate. We have to go and do it. And they had to sit out in the sun and crack the nuts and so on. So I think that's what was going on there. You might think you've learned it, but okay, this is, you know, so you've got 2 more days before you can eat the bread. So yeah, I think you're right. Do you think so, Mike?
Yeah.
Thank you.